Why did Luden's Echo slash Tempest go to being a gun? It's kind of weird because it's against the Mage Kit slash Fantasy. I've been buying a sidearm for a while now. Okay, so I'll tell the Luden story. So I'll be upfront with you guys. This is going to take a few minutes to tell this story. This is gonna be a little bit. So let me tell the story of Luden's. This is how Luden's ended up being a gun. So when we were making the Season 14 AP item changes, I had changed more than half the items, right? I reworked a lot of the items. I had new items in. There were removed items, right? And we went to our first player lab. And because the AP items were the first item system I worked on, our very first player labs had the full AP system in test. And we asked a lot of these mage players, especially these like lower skill mage players we had in, right? This was like gold and below players mostly, I think, for this player lab. I don't remember the exact details at this point, but we had a lot of these lower skill players in. And we asked them about the AP system. We're like, hey, how do you like it? And most of the response was kind of lukewarm positive. And when we dug into like, okay, well, what about the mage system, is making you not that excited about it, right? They were like neutral to lightly positive for the most part. They were like, well, see, here's the thing. I like, when you show me the items and I read them, it's really cool. But for most of the game, I'm buying Luden's, and it's exactly the same item that I've been buying for years, right? Because at this point, remember, Luden's was a mythic, which was very popular in lower MMRs, and even before the mythic system, if you'd played League before the mythic system, Luden's was the main mana item, right? And so if you were a mage player at that point, you had been buying this Luden's, basically the same item for like 8 years or something like that in a row. And so we were like, oh, well, we like what Luden's does, but we understand the feedback here around, hey, Luden's feels the same, and therefore I spend a very large percentage of my time building the same item and doing the same thing. And so therefore this change is not very exciting. And so we said, okay, so we like the gameplay, so can we make it so that Luden's feels a little different while still doing pretty much the same thing? And so I went to the workshop, right? I tried a bunch of different iterations of Luden's, and I tried a version where it splashed in a cone. I tried a version where, I tried a few different shapes, to be honest with you. I tried a few different input paradigms, right, where it would like deal damage slightly differently or at different times or whatever, right? And ultimately the conclusion that I came to was like, actually, I can make it slightly different. But what we need to change is more like the theming of the item or like the way that the item presents itself to players. And then the system, the Season 14 system, will actually feel a lot different to these people who have been buying Luden's for years and years and years and years. So when we went to the theming meeting, I suggested we make it a revolver, right? Because this was, at the time, this was the charge version where it stored up a number of charges and then just exploded, like unloaded all of them at the same time. And so I was like, oh, it could be 6 charges, because at the time, internally, it was 5 charges, because 5 is just a good number. But I was like, oh, actually, when someone else had suggested, like, a rifle or something like that, I was like, oh, what if it was a revolver with 6 shots, and it's, like, the legendary item equivalent of Hextech Revolver, which I thought was a really cool pitch. Now, I'm not sure where the communication error was here. Somehow there was some sort of communication issue where the icon we ended up getting for that ended up being a rifle and not a revolver. So the fact that it had 6 charges didn't really make sense. But whatever, right? Like, it was still a gun. I think revolver would have been cooler, but I'm not really sure. Like, again, to this day, I'm not really sure, like, was this my error on, like, how I framed the request to the artist? Was it the artist misinterpreting? Was it something else? I'm not really sure. Some kind of communication error, some kind of communication breakdown happened here, and we ended up with a rifle icon instead of a revolver. And we didn't have time to redo it. So, we have this rifle, and we said, okay, well, it's still kind of gun-like, right? The effect. That's fine. And so it was originally going to be called Caster's Companion. Nice alliteration, and it's kind of a funny, haha, it's funny. What's the Caster's Companion? You immediately think of like, a familiar or like a bird or something like that. And it's like, nope, it's a gun. It's a gun. Like, it's a gun for mages, right? And we thought that was kind of like a funny, like, tongue-in-cheek, like lampshady thing to do here. Call it Caster's Companion. However, when we got closer to like actually locking the items, some people really felt strongly that we still needed a reference to Luden, that like Luden was a really important, cool thing for the mage system, and that the staff was really important. So there were a lot of arguments here. I personally didn't really feel strongly either way. And so a compromise was eventually reached where we would call it Luden's Companion instead of Caster's Companion and ship it as a gun, but it would be Luden's Gun, right? And so that's how I ended up with Luden's Gun, or Luden's Companion, ultimately as an item in the shop instead of the staff. But at this point, basically, it's kind of coming around. I think a lot of people have come around to the conclusion of like, well, number one, we don't actually need that value anymore. We don't need it to feel different from Luden's, and the staff was more thematically appropriate. So let's just we could just change it back. Sure, let's just do it, right? And so that's what I put in, and that's what we'll have next season.
Does Riot design team put any thoughts on the tooltips of the game? Yeah, we do. Tooltips of lane quests lack a lot of details. For example, for AD carries, it doesn't say how much gold you get from killing minions and how much the gold reward is. So something they always think about for tooltips is, while it is valuable for games to have a source of truth, right? Meaning that like you can read a tooltip and know exactly what a thing is. That's not how most players engage with tooltips. And if you want to understand what I mean by that, like here, here's like all the things this does, right? That's all the things that does, right? Like there's like a billion things the jungle items do. And to be quite honest, we don't tell you a lot of this stuff in the tooltips that you experience in game. Like a lot of this stuff doesn't happen. But the problem is like if we did tell you that stuff, for most players, it would be useless. They wouldn't actually be able to like find that information, grok that information, care about that information. What's more important with tooltips is you get the general idea of what's going on, right? And so while it is valuable to have sources of truth, when a tooltip gets too long, it starts becoming much more valuable to cut all like the needless details and instead like mention the really important parts, right? So that people actually read it and understand it and know what's going on. So that's just kind of noting that like, hey, do we think about tooltips? Yes, we do. And when you see a tooltip be overly simple, it's probably because we thought about that tooltip a lot and are deliberately simplifying it to make it so it's actually understandable and readable. Because if we were to make it too complex and too wordy, the end result would be players wouldn't read it and wouldn't understand it, which is not ideal. The other thing about tooltips too is just like, I made this joke before, but what if I told you Graves' tooltip for his passive was whatever this says, right? Graves, passive. Here's his tooltip. Like this is everything it does, right? But here, let me actually show you what it actually does, right? I'm rewriting the tooltip in real time. Just pretend this gets pasted in the game. New Destiny. Graves has a shotgun. It has 2 shots and then reloads. It does more damage up close. It's a shotgun. BTW. Right? Oh, here I need to zoom in so you can read it. Like that's the tooltip, right? Like that's the actual tooltip on New Destiny. And, it says more than that in game because, we have room and it can, and like people like to know how much they're going to crit for and things like that. But like just kind of noting that like for a lot of players, a lot of the primary value they're going to get out of a tooltip is something like this, where they're reading to like kind of like understand like the basics of what's going on here. And then the more advanced players are going to want like the scalings and stuff like that so they can really understand, be like, hey, I need to know how much this scales with AP so I can know if I should buy AP, right? That's valuable too. But just noting that like one of the primary values of tooltips is actually somewhat on the simpler side a lot of times.